American Airways, the creation of a legend. My presentation is about a previously unknown and remarkable part of our American history, and the men who made so much happen for our country. The documents are unique and original. Pan American Airways was created by connections and contracts, but more importantly, the people involved provided the key step in building an airline that would later become a legend. When the Panama Canal opened in 1914, during Woodrow Wilson's presidency, it opened up a new horizon for U.S. defense concerns. With advances in airplane development after World War I, there are new worries about a threat to the canal. As author Wesley Phillips Newton stated in his book The Perilous Sky, the United States Army Air Service played an important role in the government's reaction to the threat and competition. The United States Minister to Guatemala, Arthur H. Gissler, warned the government about the growth of German influence in Central America. He suggested that the U.S. build an airline service in Central America to gain more influence. The German-operated airline, called SCATA, La Sociedad Colombo Alemana de Transportes Aéreos, operating in Colombia and Ecuador, posed a threat. They wanted to extend into Panama and through Central America to Cuba. Dr. Peter Paul von Bauer, a German Czech, had invested in SCATA and later became general director in 1922. In 1925, Dr. von Bauer went to Washington to ask permission to open SCATA's routes through the Panama Canal Zone so he could establish a terminal in Florida, but the government refused him permission. This was just about the time that General Billy Mitchell, a respected but outspoken Army Air Service officer, had been publicly charging the government in not developing better air defenses for the country. After the Kelly Airmail Act passed in the U.S. in 1925, von Bauer went to Washington again to try to gain a contract for a route for SCATA through the Canal Zone, but was turned down once again. The Postmaster General, Harry New, told von Bauer that the U.S. government would support an American airline funded by U.S. money and that had U.S. personnel flying American airplanes. He further said the government didn't think it would be a good idea to have a German company create more bases close to the Panama Canal. Although rejected by the U.S. government, von Bauer's plan seemed intriguing to a few men. They were hoping that one day they might put such an airline into operation. Those men were Major Henry Hap Arnold, Major Carl Spaatz, Major Joyette, Captain Montgomery, Mr. Richard Bevier, and Mr. George Grant Mason Jr. They conceived of an airline route from Key West, Florida, to Colon, Panama, with stops in Havana, Cuba, Cozumel Islands, Yucatan, Belize, British Honduras, Puerto Barrios, Guatemala, La Union, Salvador, Managua, Nicaragua, and Limon, Costa Rica. Their name for the airline would be Pan American Airways, Incorporated. As the business plan shows, these were the original men in the airline. This is a list of the committee members and the officers at that time. Also in the plan were stocks, assets, and descriptions of the equipment needed to maintain the airline. On this page, there are details concerning the revenue made if the airline gained the U.S. airmail contract. The men looked to see what revenue could be collected via the Panama Canal. These are schedules for departures and arrivals. The statistics for 1925 represented the population and the amount of business that would help the airline. With the business administration, capitalization was a point of concern. This regarded stocks for Class A and Class B. Major Henry Hap Arnold held many offices in the Air Corps of the Army. He is known for his honesty, thoroughness, initiative, and competence. Mr. Lewis E. Pearson, Jr. was Major Arnold's assistant, and due to his background, he provided great knowledge of aviation. Captain John K. Montgomery had the highest training in the Army and Navy Air Service as a pilot and squadron commander of aircraft. He assisted in the operating and business branch of the new airline. Mr. Walter White was a naval aviator. He left his position as assistant to the president of a large copper company to join Pan American Airways Incorporated. He is well trained in finance, accounting, general business, and office management. Mr. Grant Mason attended Yale and studied aviation from its technical side for over a year. He comes from a family of railroad men and bankers and has knowledge in transportation and finance. This is Schedule A from Key West, Florida to Havana, Cuba. It includes details on revenue, passengers, depreciation, and operating expenses. This is Schedule B from Key West, Florida to Colón, Panama. This includes the costs at each station, the funds for equipment, operating expenses, and the schedule for departures and arrivals. This is a list of subscribers and businesses. And this is an agreement letter to buy Pan American stock. Pan Am wanted to bid on the Key West to Havana U.S. airmail contract that was not yet released since March and was able to gain it on July 16, 1927. Gabriel Durepo and Albert Mills, in their book Anti-History, were surfacing the social and political tactics that led to multiple enactments of the past as it is transformed by actors into histories. Essayed by Durepo and Mills, because of the lack of resources of the three organizations bidding for the airmail contract, the U.S. Postmaster forced PAAI, Florida Airways, and ACA to merge. ACA was said to hold exclusive landing rights in Cuba and swallowed Florida Airways. PAAI held the airmail contract granted by the U.S. government, but owned no planes and no landing rights in Cuba. ACA retained control of the merged organizations, and Tripp was elected president and managing editor of its subsidiary, PAAI. ACA was the Aviation Corporation of America, founded by William Vanderbilt, Sherman Fairchild, Grover Loening, William Rockefeller, Sonny Whitney, John Hambledon, and Juan Tripp. The Atlantic, Gulf, and Caribbean Airways, formed by Richard Hoyt on October 11, 1927, was a revival of a departed airline called Florida Airways, which was founded by Eddie Rickenbacker and Reed Chambers. Previously, on September 8th, Captain Montgomery, part of the original Pan Am group, obtained a contract from the Cuban Army to use their aviation field for 5 years. Tripp had made plans for 2 Fokker F-7 planes to arrive in Key West, but there was no stable place to land due to the weather. Fortunately, a small airline called West Indian Aerial Express was ferrying 2 planes. One of them was a Fairchild FC-2 float plane, and Basil Rowe, the owner, agreed to charter the plane for the first flight. Cy Caldwell flew on October 19, 1927, the day of the contract's deadline, from Key West to Havana. Pan Am began service 9 days later. On June 23, 1928, the 3 companies merged, and the Aviation Corporation of America was a holding company, and Pan American Airways was a subsidiary. Juan Tripp was made the president of the holding company and the general manager of Pan Am. I would like to say a special thank you to George Mason, Doug Miller, Robert Gant, Gabriel Durepos, and Albert Mills.